Okay. I see the logic here. So, a related question to impartiality that will split into more specific forms of effective altruism concerns the scope of moral relevance. So, for instance, many effective altruists will also commit to the well-being of non-human animals, and so will align against factory farming, for instance. And then the question about future generations, people who will exist but do not yet exist, do they matter morally speaking? So first, uh, I know you commented on this already, but what's the precise relationship between effective altruism and long-termism? And then if you could define long-termism, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I think effective altruism is so long-termism is one of the big cause areas of effective altruism. So effective altruism is this kind of broad movement about trying to do good effectively. And then one way that lots of people try to do this is through long-termist work. Okay, so then what is long-termism? So there's kind of a weaker thesis and a stronger thesis. The stronger thesis is that making sure the future goes well is just vastly more important than everything else we're doing. So like how our actions impact the far future are just orders of magnitude more important than how our actions impact the present. The weaker
Hmm.
thesis, and the one that I think is all that you need, is just that we should be doing more to make sure that the far future goes well. So I think like for example, on there's some biosecurity treaty, and the number of people enforcing it is like 3 or something. Less funding goes into it than the typical McDonald's. And so if you think that that it would be a really bad thing if we went extinct, even if you don't think that's bad for future generations, even if you think the only reason it would be bad if we went extinct is because just everyone would die, what turns out that if you look at expert predictions, they tend to think that the odds of us going extinct in the next century are non-trivial, and a lot of them say the odds are over 1%. But despite that, a very, 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 very tiny portion of global wealth goes into trying to mitigate existential threats. You know,
Hmm.
likely less than 1/1 millionth of global wealth. Well, I don't know if that number's right, but a very small portion. And so, in light of the fact that there's just that it looks like existential threats are not trivial, and it looks like extinction would be really bad, and very little funding is going into averting it. And in particular, into like there's certain risks that it seems like we spend really very little money on, like trying to mitigate against biosafe security risks. I think it's pretty common sense that we should be doing more to try to safeguard against that. Now, exactly how to prioritize between that and other issues, that will hinge on some ethical considerations. So if you buy that future generations matter, because this could imperil such a vast number of future generations, maybe this is the most important thing by orders of magnitude. While if you don't, maybe you should just think it's one among many very important things. But in any case,
Hmm.
I think it's relatively clear that that kind of like that making sure that life goes well, for that making sure that we don't go extinct is an important thing, and it's a thing that we should be spending money on and that more people should be working on.
So why is long-termism controversial? Why does it get people riled up? I mean, the way you've articulated it, it seems like good old-fashioned common sense. But I
So
know
I
that they can become quite heated.
Yeah, so I think I basically think that the reason why long-termism is controversial is that so strong long-termism, the idea that the far future matters vastly more than the present, that's of course very controversial, right? Like
Hmm.
it seems unintuitive that people in the distant future would, in the aggregate matter much more than people in the present. That like the main thing we should be doing as a species is trying to make sure the far future goes well and to make sure we don't go extinct. I think really the backlash that long-termism gets is largely as a result of you have lots of long-termists who make the much less modest claim, the strong long-termist claim, and so people get upset at that. They find that claim to be outrageous, and so then that's what makes it controversial. Even though I think the minimal commitments to thinking that typical long-termist activities are justified are much more modest. Now, to be clear, cards on the table, I am a strong long-termist, so I think that making sure the far future goes well is vastly more important than making sure the present goes well. But even if I weren't a
Hmm.
strong long-termist, I would still be in favor of the long-termist actions that EAs do. And in fact, even if I thought future people didn't matter at all, I would be in favor of the actions that EAs do. Okay, now why am I a strong long-termist? Well, I think the basic case for it is actually just very straightforward, which is I think all you need is the following two premises. The first one is that in expectation, the far future has vastly more people than the present. And then the
Hmm.
second one is that you should not count the interests of far future people as being vastly less significant than of present people. So you shouldn't think that a person 500 years in the future is like 1/1 millionth as important as a person in the present. You shouldn't think, for example, like if you could either help one person now, if you could either save one life now or save 1,000 lives in 100 years, it would be better to save 1,000 lives in 100 years than to save one person now. Once you think that nearly all people in expectation are in the future, and that people in the future matter just like people in the present do, then it seems like steering the future so that it goes well is really important. Now, of course, then there are further questions about what effective ways of steering the future can be done. I think an important way is we should try not to go extinct, and we should try to make sure that in the future we don't spread astronomical amounts of suffering. So I think it's, for example, I think it's quite important that we not create factory farms. That there aren't factory farms in the far future. I think it's important that we try to get concern for potential digital mines secured into law, because I think it at least seems like a live possibility that you could have digital mines, and there's some worry that we wouldn't take the welfare of digital mines seriously at all. So I think that's certainly one concern. But I mean, the core idea is just once you think that people in the far future matter, and that in expectation there are way more of them than people in the present, then making sure the far future goes well starts to look like a safe bet. An analogy I've given is, imagine we discovered that that there were just underground caves that had vast numbers of people. For every one person alive, for each of the 8 billion people on Earth, there were 10 million people in caves. So vastly more people in caves. Then it would seem pretty reasonable, and assume our actions in lots of ways affected the people in caves. Then it would seem pretty reasonable to think that how our actions affected the people in caves was a very important determinant of which actions we should take. It was worth doing things that benefited the people in caves. It was not worth doing things that destroyed the people in caves. If you think of future people as being analogous to the people in caves, then if there are in expectation vastly more of them than present people, then their welfare in the aggregate matters quite a lot.
So if we agree with your strong long-termist commitments about the expected utility for the number of people that exist in the future, and given that the number of future people vastly outweighs or is greater than the number of people that currently exist, we have to give greater weight to considerations that affect them. Well, what if the future is infinite and there are just an infinite number of future people? Then it's like no matter how minor the improvement we can affect to the future, we will always choose the extremely small improvement to their lives over a vast improvement to present conditions, because the total amount of welfare for present people, given that the number of present people here is finite, it will just never compare. So do you see that as a potential objection?
I mean, I just bite the bullet. If the future had infinite people and you could do things that made the future better for all of those people, then that would seem worth doing.
But I mean, in terms of how would you aggregate, if you could relieve the headache slightly of everybody who ever has a headache in the future, or save 1,000 people from dying right now, it would seem that this calculus indicates that we ought to mildly improve the future people's headaches over saving.
So I think what you'll think about that will depend on if you're an aggregationist. So aggregationism is the thesis that an arbitrarily large number of extremely small benefits are in total add up to be better than one very substantial benefit, right? So it implies that enough people stubbing their toe and being in mild discomfort is worse than one person being tortured. Now, I accept aggregationism, but you don't have to be a long-termist. You could be a non-aggregationist long-termist and just think that the only kinds of interventions that are important to carry out in the future are those that make the future go significantly better, that make it so that someone's welfare is significantly higher, rather than merely doing whichever interventions do just a teeny bit of good, for an arbitrarily large number of people. So the actual interventions that EAs tend to support are ones that make it so that we don't go extinct. And so if you're a long-termist, then if you think the future could be infinitely good, then it seems like, well, making sure we don't go extinct so we get that infinite value, that would seem really valuable. That would seem really important.